Good morning and welcome to Discover Christian Church. We're so glad you're here with us. Our mission is to love God, love people, and impact the world.
Well, her name was Harriet Bailey, and really unfortunately for her, she was a slave in the United States. And one of the most horrible things, there was a lot of horrible stuff about slavery, but one of the really painful things was she carried her baby to term, and when he was born, they took her from him, separated them. That was common. So she would spend her day laboring in the fields. But because she found out where her baby boy was, and it was close enough, at night she would sneak out, walk over 10 miles, be with her son, tell him that she loved him and encourage him, and she would walk back, get a few hours of sleep, and be a day laborer, hard, toiling, painful work in the field. And she did that over and over and over. What a great example of love and sacrifice. Now, you may have heard of her son. His name was Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist, a speaker, a writer, and a reformer. And Harriet Bailey's love and sacrifice impacted her son's life, and he impacted the world. So we're starting our new series today. We're going to be talking about 4 different subjects, all starting with the word look. So today we're going to look back. Next week we're going to look up. The following week we're going to look forward. And then the following week we're going to look inward. And on that final Sunday, it's the 60th anniversary of this church, and we want to make sure that everybody's here to celebrate and see how we can be part of this story going forward. So last week, we finished up the book of Acts, our series on that, and we're going to use a verse that kind of bridges between Acts and this series. And if you have your Bibles, if you turn to Acts chapter 4, it's the exact verse that Jim used last week. It's a great verse, and Jim did a great job last week, obviously, and this is a tie-in from, basically, if you think about Acts just going forward, like we're the continuing story of Acts. Acts really never ends. It's still going on. We are still part of the church that was started back in that day. So we're in Acts chapter 4, verse 32, and today I'm going to be using the Message paraphrase, mostly because I think it sometimes brings something a little fresher. If you, like me, have been in the NIV for decades, sometimes it's nice to just go into another version. So today we're going to use the Message paraphrase, starting in Acts chapter 4, verse 32. And this is what it says. The whole congregation of believers was united as one heart, one mind. They didn't even claim ownership of their own possessions. No one said, "That's mine, you can't have it." They shared everything. This is a group of people who were united. They were full of the Holy Spirit. And as you read through the book of Acts, no one ever said, "You have to give everything." But what they did was see a need. And then they would say, "You know what? I can do something about that. I can step into that. I can help. I can volunteer. I can give. And I can do something that helps take care of that need." And that's what they did. And so their gifts, their service was voluntary. It was also sacrificial. And it made a huge impact. And it's a great example for us. You know, in the book of Acts, again, you can read about all kinds of stories of people serving and sacrificing. And then in the book of Hebrews, the author tells us in chapter 11 about a whole bunch of people who sacrificed. And if you want to go ahead and turn to that, we'll be getting to that in just a minute. But we also, as a church family, we are blessed that over these 60 years, several people, many people, have sacrificially given of their time and their talents and their treasure. They have offered things of their lives that makes it possible for us. And I was privileged this week. I talked to a few people, had some video interviews, and I got to speak with Lou Ann Smith and Cliff and Joan Purvis. And we recorded this conversation, and then I just edited it down. So if you would, please pay attention. It's about 4 minutes long, so grab your coffee and pay attention and watch this great interview.
I know that we decided that we needed a church, especially your folks, Cliff and Sarah, and some others decided we needed a church in Dublin because it was a trek to Beachwall. And so they started looking for property and found some. And in order to get it, they took second mortgages on their house. They were just really diligent about that. And there were, I think, in the beginning, there were 38 of us, including children. And after they bought the property, then they remodeled the farmhouse, which took quite a bit of effort because they were working on it day and night whenever they could. So it was quite a venture.
Well, I think when you're working together, like when we were starting to build the church and clean up the old farmhouse, we all became closer because we were working together and we were doing things together. We were seeing things change, and different people have different ideas and concepts of what happened, but they all came together to make it happen in a positive way. And as has been said several times, people made serious sacrifices to make it happen. Those things I'll probably never forget, but it was just the people all coming together. Everybody did what they could, gave what they could, and the Lord blessed us, and just the rest is history.
So I think, yes, when you work together, you have an investment. Yeah. So rather than just attending, working together really helps tie the knot that binds us together.
Yeah.
We were really a close-knit group. Our whole social life pretty much was church.
Some of the best times were Sunday nights when L.W. Bain, the preacher then, he would sit on the front row of the pews, by the way, which were handmade by the guys, and L.W. would just start singing a hymn a cappella, and then we'd all join in, and then somebody else would start another one. It would be a great Sunday evening service. And for me, I eventually saw the light. It was actually on a Sunday night when Mrs. Bain, I think, gave a little devotional, and she had a painting of the road to Emmaus, and her storytelling of that Bible story just really touched my heart, even to this day. So, that was the day I decided to get baptized. So, just wonderful stories about individuals who, can touch your life when you don't even expect it.
Well, I'd just like to say thanks to all the people who started this church, and many of them have gone on to glory, but it was a great exercise in teaching us how to sacrifice, to make the church a priority, and they gave up a lot of things to make this happen. And I think God has continued to bless us as the years have gone by. So proud to be a part of not only that church, but my dad building it, but I had some opportunity to work with Lincoln Construction and build some of it too. So it's been a lifelong commitment to my family.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You know that when I say I love you, we love you, it's genuine. Continue to be blessed and continue, as I know you are, to make an impact for the kingdom. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So when you hear about sacrifice like that, it feels kind of uncommon. But the reality is, for people who love God, that should be the norm. That should just be how we live. And again, if you go to Hebrews chapter 11, you're going to see some incredible faith. In fact, this is commonly called the Faith Hall of Fame. And we're going to jump in about verse 17 and go to the end of the chapter. So the author writes this: "By faith, Abraham, at the time of testing, offered Isaac back to God. Acting in faith, he was as ready to return the promised son, his only son, as he had been to receive him. And after he had already been told, 'Your descendants shall come from Isaac.' Abraham figured that if he wanted to, he could raise the dead. God could do that. In a sense, that's what happened when he received Isaac back, alive from off the altar. By an act of faith, Isaac reached into the future and he blessed Jacob and Esau. By an act of faith, Jacob on his deathbed blessed each of Joseph's sons in turn, blessing them with God's blessing, not his own, as he bowed worshipfully upon his staff. By an act of faith, Joseph, while dying, prophesied the exodus of Israel and made arrangements for his own burial. By an act of faith, Moses' parents hid him away for 3 months after his birth. They saw the child's beauty and they braved the king's decree. By faith, Moses, when grown, refused the privileges of the Egyptian royal house. He chose a hard life with God's people rather than an opportunistic, soft life of sin with the oppressors. He valued suffering in the Messiah's camp far greater than the Egyptian wealth because he was looking ahead, anticipating the payoff. By an act of faith, he turned his heel on Egypt, indifferent to the king's blind rage. He had his eye on the one no eye can see, and kept right on going. By an act of faith, he kept the Passover feast and sprinkled Passover blood on each house so that the destroyer of the firstborn wouldn't touch them. By an act of faith, Israel walked right through the Red Sea on dry ground. The Egyptians tried it and drowned. By faith, the Israelites marched around the walls of Jericho for 7 days, and the walls fell flat. By an act of faith, Rahab, the Jericho harlot, welcomed the spies and escaped the destruction that came on those who refused to trust God. I could go on, but I've run out of time. There are so many more: Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets. Through acts of faith, they toppled kingdoms, made justice work, took the promises for themselves. They were protected from lions, fires, and sword thrusts, turned disadvantage to advantage, won battles, routed alien armies. Women received their loved ones back from the dead. There were those who, under torture, refused to give in and go free, preferring something better, resurrection. Others braved abuse and whips, and yes, chains and dungeons. We have stories of those who were stoned, sawed in two, murdered in cold blood. Stories of vagrants wandering the earth in animal skins, homeless, friendless, powerless. The world didn't deserve them, making their way as best they could upon the cruel edges of the world. Not one of these people, even though their lives of faith were exemplary, got their hands on what was promised. God had a better plan for us, that their faith and our faith would come together to make one completed whole, their lives of faith not complete apart from ours. These people were full of faith and they were full of hope. And in the Bible, hope doesn't mean some sort of potential, wishy-washy, I hope this will happen thing, the way that we think of hope. The Bible, when it talks of hope, it means certainty. It's going back, if you DVR'd, maybe not yesterday's game, but if you DVR'd the Ohio State game versus Clemson on January 1st, right? You can watch that and you can get excited again and you can get anxious of what's going to happen, but the outcome is already determined. You know Ohio State's going to win 49-28. So think of that game, all right? But that's the kind of certainty the Bible is talking about. You're watching the DVR and you're saying, I hope Ohio State wins. No, you're saying, I understand that Ohio State is going to win. We have hope because of God. And that hope is certain. And as we look back, we think of the faithfulness of people 60 years ago who can continue to bless us today. They sacrificed for us so that we could have great facilities where we could serve and gather and grow in our faith. They mentioned the old farmhouse that they purchased with second mortgages on their homes. They renovated it. They built themselves what is now our commons and our offices. Many of our offices are in that space. That was the original worship center. The next worship center is where our student center is now. The following worship center is where our gymnasium is now. And there were additional classrooms for people to meet in, mostly children, and then also sometimes adults, places to gather and learn more about the Lord. And the building in which we now sit, this worship center, was also part of the people who came before us and sacrificed. And some of you are part of that story. Many of you are part of that story. But please understand this. This is so important. I know you know this, but this building, any building, is not the church. You don't go to church. You are the church. We are the church. We are the temple constructed by God. And buildings are great, and they're useful tools. But the good news of Jesus is never about buildings. The good news of Jesus is about hearts and lives and souls. And that's what the sacrifice is all about. That's why we give and serve and love. But what's really neat is God uses whatever resources are given to him to draw people closer. And in fact, if you go all the way back, again, 60 years to the time when the people were thinking, what are we going to do? We need a place to meet. They decided to work on this farmhouse. And I had an opportunity to do another video interview this week with Mary Ann Terry and Patty Mazowski. They're sisters. And the video came out so great. It was amazing. The audio, nothing. There was no audio. I don't know what happened, but there was no audio. So you get to see a picture of Patty and Mary Ann, and kind of me up in the corner there. But you can tell we were having a great time. But they weren't able to re-record, but they did later on send a text of what basically our conversation was about. And I want you to hear this story. So this is what they wrote. Cliff Purvis Sr. and Harold Grandy started building a new house next to Mom and Dad's house. So Cliff and Harold started a construction company, and they were building a house next to the house that Mary Ann and Patty lived in. So we three older kids went over and pestered them daily with all sorts of questions, and they were so kind to us. They asked us if we went to church, and we said no. They asked Mom and Dad if they could pick us up and take us to youth group at Beachwald Church of Christ. After several months, Mom started attending also. By then, a group of members at Beachwald decided there was need for a church in the Dublin area, so they purchased an old farmhouse on Martin Road and began renovations. Dad joined the work crew, being a pretty good handyman, and a lifelong set of friendships began with Cliff and Harold, Dave and Paul Thompson, Clayton Grimstad, and Don Roberts, among others. When the invitation at the first service of the new church was given, Dad went forward, and was baptized that evening at Beachwald. Once Dad was baptized, he became an avid student of the Bible, and we have a lifetime of notes, devotionals, sermons, Bibles, and commentaries that bear witness to his faith. Some of you knew John and Carolyn, and I can tell you, if you didn't know them, they were wonderful servants of God. And at their funerals, it was a joy to be able to confidently say, John is with Jesus. Carolyn is with Jesus. But the only reason that happened is because people reached out to their family and said, let me tell you about Jesus. Jesus invited the people before us to serve and to love and to sacrifice And many people said yes to that. And because of their faith and God's faithfulness, we stand on the shoulders of people from 60 years ago. And in fact, that stretches back generation after generation after generation to the early church. So, in the future, when people turn back and look at our generation, what are they going to see? Will they see people who love and have sacrificed so they could make a difference for the next generation? Or will they see something else? I, like many people, are increasingly concerned that beyond the very real medical and financial and emotional realities of this ongoing pandemic, and again, those things are very real, there's another effect that seems to be growing right alongside it, and I would call it an epidemic of self-centeredness. And this problematic consumer mentality is everywhere. It's in businesses, it's in volunteer organizations, it's in youth leagues, in schools, and sadly, it's in the church. And I mean the capital C church. Everyone I talk to is saying the same thing. Now, obviously, again, please hear me. Some people have genuine medical conditions and medical concerns, and that is 100% fine. That's more than understandable. That's right. But there are some others who gather for worship or for life group, only when it's convenient. And this consumer-based attitude shows up in ideas like these. Well, people should greet me, but I don't want to serve on the welcome team. I really want to grow deeper in my faith, but a discipleship group, that just demands too much of me. I want to be cared for and loved personally, but I don't have time to develop a caring, loving relationship in a life group. We need to have a really strong children's ministry for my kids. Or we need to have great drinks at our global cafe. Or our partnerships with our global outreach partners need to be really deep, and we need to be serving. But please don't ask me to volunteer. Everybody wants to be served, but few are willing to serve. If we don't consider Jesus first regarding our schedules and our families and our resources and our decisions, just understand, I think we're robbing ourselves. We're missing out on the blessing that God would give us. We're robbing our loved ones of seeing how God works in really hard times when people say yes to Him. We're actually robbing God when we do that. And painfully, we are robbing people around us who might place their faith in Jesus if someone would only reach out to them. Because there are Johns and Carolyns and Patties and Mary Ann's around all of us, right around you and me, every day. This month's memory verse reminds us to make a difference. So I'd ask for you to say it with me. Let's do this together. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Colossians 3:17. Thank you. Let me just share one more example of sacrifice of some people who came before us. And again, thank you for those of you that are serving and sacrificing and have done that in the past as well. Thank you so much. But there was, I used to work at a Christian recording studio, and we purchased another studio that was closing, and had a lot of really good equipment. But one of the things they had that we didn't really need was a grand piano, because we had a grand piano. So you don't really need two. Unless you're doing dueling pianos or something, which we didn't do that. So we didn't need the second grand piano. And we had it for a while, and it was being used in another place. But the owner of the studio, he said, we probably should just need to sell this. And the reason we were selling it is because we were moving back, and the church that we were coming to, this church, had a really old piano. And so the owner of the studio said, hey, would the church maybe be interested in buying that piano? And I said, well, how much? And he said, I don't know, $4,000. Now, if you don't know anything about pianos, you're like, $4,000? Are you kidding me? It's about a $20,000 piano. And so he was saying, hey, $4,000, is that okay? And so I said, let me talk to some people. And at that time, the church was just getting into some stewardship campaigns. And honestly, there wasn't like $4,000 just sitting around somewhere. It was a long time ago. And a couple in the church heard about it. And they said, you know what? We have about $4,000 saved up to buy new living room furniture, a whole new living room. And how about if we just give that money to the church so the church can have the piano? And we'll just keep the living room furniture that we have. It's fine. That's what they did. And so for 30 years, that piano has been used every week in worship to draw people into God's presence, to celebrate who God is. It's that piano right there. So today we look back and we give thanks to God for those who gave so much so other people could take one step closer to Jesus. And obviously, as we look back and think about sacrifice, the most powerful, compelling, necessary sacrifice was by Jesus himself. He gave everything, literally everything, so we could have a restored relationship with God. And so I would ask you, if you would, to just close your eyes. I'm going to continue reading just through Hebrews right after where we stopped, just continuing there and then going to the book of Luke. And think about the sacrifice that Jesus gave, that he made for us. Do you see what this means? All these pioneers who blazed the way, all these veterans cheering us on. It means we better get on with it. Start running and never quit. No extra spiritual fat, no parasitic sins. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed, that exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever. And now he's there in the place of honor, right alongside God. When you find yourselves flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item. That long litany of hostility he plowed through. That will shoot adrenaline into your souls. In this all-out match against sin, others have suffered far worse than you, to say nothing of what Jesus went through, all that bloodshed. And then Jesus is gathered with his disciples in the upper room the night before he was crucified. Taking bread, he blessed it and broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body given for you. Eat it in my memory. He did the same with the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, poured out for you. It's the next day, and Jesus is on the cross. He's been hanging there. By now it was noon. The whole earth became dark, the darkness lasting 3 hours, a total blackout. The temple curtain split right down the middle. Jesus called loudly, Father, I place my life in your hands. And then he breathed his last.